Today we're going to look at my Uncle Charles. Underneath the lantern by the barrack gate, darling, I remember the way you used to wait. 'Twas there that you whispered tenderly that you love me, you'll always be my lily of the lamplight, my own Lily Marlene. It's 1959 and Charles is in the kitchen with my father. My father's eating his breakfast. My father is nearly 20 years older than Charles, and Charles is now about 44. He's unmarried, and he's lived with my father and mother and my aunt and Mater, my grandmother, since he was 16. In fact, he's one of the people who came to live with my father when my father married my mother, unbeknown to him, and he's been there since then. And he's always seeking approval from my father, a certainty in a way, and it's probably maybe because he left school very young. He was the youngest child, and he lost his own father, of course, in the First World War, and so my father is something of a substitute, and he wants to impress him with things. He wants him to say, "Oh, that's very good, you're absolutely right about that," which my father does. He just agrees with everything he says, however ridiculous. Some of the things aren't, but some are. It's 1959, remember, and the motorways are just being opened in Britain, the first ones. You know, Herman, I was reading about, the motorways we've got now, that motorway. Yeah, that's right. It's a copy. We've copied it from the Germans. Yeah. They first built the first one, before the war. Autobahns, they called them. Autobahns. And it was Hitler. We're going on about Hitler, how bad he was, everything. They don't say about what good things he did. What do you think of that? And my father says, yes, I suppose you could find a little bit of good in the worst person. Yeah, I suppose so. You know that song, Lily Marlene, when I worked at the prisoner of war camp? The German prisoners of war used to sing it, My father says, yes, I know, they used to sing it when they come around to do some gardening for us, didn't they? Because Italians and Germans used to come around to do gardening. Yeah, they did. And anyway, it's a German song. That's another thing. It's German. We copied it, Vor der Kaserne von dem großen Tor Stadt der Laterne und steigt in Innenvor. Dort wollen wir uns wiedersehen, bei der Laterne wollen wir's daheim, wie einst Lily Marlene, wie einst Lily Marlene. Charles was what's called a conchi in the war. As you remember, Mater didn't want him to go to war because he lost the first husband in the First World War, husband, and she didn't want her son to go. She thought he'd get killed as well. And she said he'd chop off his toes if he signed up, and with a spade when he was gardening. But he didn't have to do that because my mother prevailed on, again, my father to bail out Charles, and my father taught Charles what to say when he went before a tribunal for conscientious objectors. And in fact, my father had the script perfectly, and he got off going into the war. He was excused it. He became a conscientious objector, and he went to work in a prisoner of war camp at a place called Stapleford Woods outside Newark, and when he looked after Italians and Germans. It's probably there that he started seeing other sides of things and seeing that other languages, and not that he could speak any himself, but that he saw a different way of looking at things. And in fact, that might have encouraged him, because after the war, when he didn't have a job, my father found a job for him at a place called Ransom and Miles Ball Bearing Factory in Newark. And Charles made a friend of a person called Frank Craven, and Frank Craven was interested particularly in continental travel, and he set up something called the Ransom and Miles Continental Travel Club. And Charles would go along there to this hall they used to meet in and play French records and things like that. And he'd bring them back sometimes and play them to me. And he says, you should listen to this, They're very soft. They're none of this like banging like this rock and roll. What is it you play? I said, well, like Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah, not like that. It's proper playing, this is. It's French. You know, it's played softly. You know, they don't do it like that, don't bang about. Anyway, off went Charles to France by boat from Dover. The first person in my immediate family who ever went on holiday sur le continent. La mer qu'envoie danser les longs des golfes a des reflets d'argent. La mer, des reflets changent sur la pluie. La mer à ses tétons confond les blancs moutons avec les anges si purs. La mer légère et de joie infinie. Well, that was an attempt at it anyway. The French films he started to see, because I played those in the Continental Club. They rented French films with Frank, but he didn't sort of like imbue any continental style. He didn't start drinking Pernod and wearing a beret or anything like that. He couldn't look more than he did as a quintessential Englishman, with his sports jacket carefully pressed, his very highly polished shoes, his sparkling little Austin 7 car. I mean, he in his appearance, in his manner, he was still very much a parochial East Midlander, and yet he had this interest, which is sort of interest in the wider world, challenging it in a way. And he would say to my father, "See, I've got another record, you know. It's called It Is Good. It Is Good." And my father said, "Oh yes, I think I know that. Yes, it's called C'est Si Bon." What? It's C'est Si Bon. Oh yeah. Yes, that's it. I'll put it on for you. Vaughan, you listen to this. It's soft. You'll hear it. C'est si bon de patin porto, brasse des zebras des eaux, et chantant des chansons. C'est si bon de se dire de mots doux, des petits rangs en tout, mais qui en disant long. One of the things that Charles liked to do is to expose wrongdoings and blurt out what was the truth about things, whether people knew it or not. The way he said it in a sort of querulous way often, and it was almost as though the person he's trying to convince, he was almost accusing them of going along with it and not knowing about it or not caring about it. He would say to my father, "You know, Britain, we built our empire as warmongers. That's what we did. We went and just stole things from people, went round and told everybody what to do. That's what we did, you know, and then other people get blamed if they did the same. Look at the Germans. They said those concentration camps, you know, they set up." I said, "Yes, that's right." And well, the copy does, you know. We started them in South Africa. We put the Boers in them, in the concentration camps. The copy does. I says, "Yeah, yes, quite, yes." And you know, when the houses were blown up by the Israelis, blown up those Arab houses are blown up because they don't like these Palestinians doing things. Well, the copy does, you see. We used to run Palestine, and you know, we used to blow up the Arab houses. These Jews are now doing it then. They didn't know how to do it when they were in, well, was it Poland and that? They weren't blowing up houses there. They copied the British. They did it there. He saw himself something as a sort of like a moral crusader. He would say things like, I mean, his first part had said, "You know, all this row about all these black people coming to live here. Well, I think they should tell us as many as possible to come and live here. I mean, we owe it, don't we? We went to live with them. Why can't they come and live with us?" He also believed that nations should be completely abolished. He said, "All these wars, you know, Herman, all these wars, if they didn't have any nations to fight each other, there won't be any wars." This sort of idealist moral crusading was all very well, but sometimes he sort of turned his ire on his own family in a way, not directly to my father ever, but he did once or twice to my mother and also to Irene. He didn't like my father's drinking, he didn't like my mother's men friends, and he didn't like Irene's wanderings. But you see, in some way they had some more cachet in a way, because my father had been the only person who'd been to university among a lot of them. He'd been at Oxford. My mother was on the stage at 15 as a showgirl, whereas Irene, of course, went to South Africa. So he didn't have any USP himself, and I think one of the things about his continental interests and his views of the world, his sort of internationalist views, was some way of giving himself a USP equivalent to theirs. Anyway, he was not only the first person in our family to go abroad on holiday, he was also the first person in our family to actually go, this time, on a plane and to Italy. Ho ho ho, nel blu dipinta di blu, felici di stare lassù. Volare was the record he brought back for myself and my brother, and it was a double A side because it had Come Prima on the back. And he would say again, here's another on the back, Vaughan. It's better than rock and roll. See how soft it is. It's nice. It's nice. You play like that, you see. And on the back was this one, Come Prima. Come prima, più da prima, t'amerò. Per la vita, la mia vita ti darò. Sembra sogno, river verti, carazetto. Le tue mani tra le mani stringla da tu. Il mio mondo tutto, il mondo per sé. Adesso voglio bene come a te. Ogni giorno, ogni istante, dolcemente ti darò. Come prima, più di prima, ti amerò. Well, things would change for Charles because when he was nearly 50, he decided, he got married. He met a woman called Marjorie who was 45 and she was unmarried, but the main thing is she'd never been married, that she was a very strict Roman Catholic, and so before he could marry her he had to convert, and it was in some ways it was the best thing he did because it sort of gave him an introduction to the Catholic Church. And of course Roman Catholicism was perfect for him because it had clear rules, and it was an organisation that predates nationalism and continues to upstage it in a way, so it fitted him like a glove. Sometimes Marjorie, his new wife, was embarrassed by his outbursts and some of his lecturings and hectorings, and she said, you know, Charles, he thinks deeply about things, thinks deeply. Of course this was like a red rag to a bull to my mother and Irene, as you can imagine. They just called him Blawty Boy. Well, Blawty was a sort of an East Midlands word, and I haven't heard it anywhere else, but it's sort of a mixture of, it sort of employs him in a way of crying and sort of like blurting things out at the same time. You know, it's the Catholic Church, it's the proper church, you know. That sort of thing, you see. It's absolutely perfect for him. He's like a little boy in a way, but he had his own wife and his own house now. But of course the problem was that the confrontations increased because my father was taking more of a back seat and avoiding him. So it was with Irene and my mother that these confrontations now took place. And one of the biggest ones I remember was when he announced that he was going with Marjorie abroad, but this time they were going with Father O'Dowd. We're going with Father O'Dowd. he was a local priest, a Catholic priest. We're going on a pilgrimage of a lifetime. I said, a what? A pilgrimage of a lifetime. What's that? Well, we're going to the Holy Land. We're going to the Holy Land. And he said, you mean Israel, aren't there? Yes, of course we need Israel. Well, no, yes. Well, it sounds like a holiday of a lifetime to me. Of course, he went out and slammed the door on that occasion, and there were lots of occasions like that. He would come in and sort of lecture them about French cuisine. He says, the French, when we talk all about our cooking things on television, they've invented it. Cuisine, it's a French word. Chef is a French word, And the true church is in Rome. It's not here. It's not Archbishop of Canterbury, He's just like an actor. He's an actor. He just dresses up like a dressing up box. He's not properly recognised. He represents a church that doesn't really exist. It's like a play, And it was set up by a murderer, Henry VIII, a murderer. Murdered people, pulled all the churches down and stole them. He's stolen York Parish Church. We should have it back. One of the biggest rows ended up with my mother estranging him, really, and sent him to Coventry and wouldn't let him in the house to come and see her for a year or two, and we had to go and see my brother. I went to see him privately, and it was when he came round once and said that she should retire as the matron of the Old People's Home, the Red Cross Old People's Home. And he had a point in a way, because she was 70, and some of the old people were 70, and she, was hiding her age and everything. And when she did retire, you can imagine how that went down. And when she did retire, he said the house that she bought was too big. She bought it for her father had died by then, and she'd married again, and Irene was there, and Irene was looking to marry. Of course, her husband, or the future third husband, he died. But anyway, they got this big house, biggest house, and she said Charles would come round and say, there's people starving on the street. The people haven't got anything over their heads, anywhere to live, and you're living in this big house like that. It's selfish, because he lived in a little flat, you see. So she said, Charles, there's the door, you can get out. Charles was always very kind to me and my brother, I'll say. We used to play drafts with him when we were kids on the kitchen table in the evenings, and we always, particularly my brother, always won. But he always took it in good heart, and he always was very supportive in that way. But in some ways he was like a walking contradiction, because he was a parochial man who was fascinated by the wider world, and he blurted out what he truly believed, sometimes right and often wrong. But it makes you think, really, because as I find in my experience that the further up your greasy pole you get in your career, the more you have to exercise diplomacy. As my father once said, he ran a small school in Newark, and he said, well, the caretaker can say what he likes to anybody, but I can't. And it's true in a way. You are constrained by that. Yet I do think saying occasionally what is truly in your heart, hang what others think, is probably pretty good for your soul, really. And Charles was always that little boy who blurted out, or was that blorted, I don't know, the truth as he saw it. He's a bit like that kid in that Hans Christian Andersen famous fairy tale. Everybody was cheering like mad, except one little boy. You see, he hadn't heard about the magic suit, and didn't know what he was supposed to see. Well, as the king came by, the little boy looked, and horrified, and said, "Look at the king! Look at the king! Look at the king! 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 The king is in the altogether, the altogether, the altogether. The king is in the altogether, as naked as the day that he was born. The king is in the altogether, the altogether, the altogether. It's altogether the very least the king has ever worn." Uncle Charles, and whatever people said about him, his sister and his sister said, they said he looked a bit like David Niven, the old British movie star. And well, here is Charles when he was about 70. Good looking man.